Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start with a short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Nirataya Me. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. And over to you, Venerable.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. And we'll do a short meditation on one of the things we looked at last week. So we finished the 4 establishments of mindfulness, or 4 close placements of mindfulness, which we've been spending most of the time on, and then started looking at some of the other of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, starting with the 4 supreme strivings. That's the second group among the 37 harmonies. So let's just do a little bit of meditation to get a better understanding of those. And to start with, check your motivation for being here, participating in this class. If you are comfortable with the motivation of bodhicitta, aspiring to become a Buddha, fully awakened, in order to benefit all other beings, then you can remind yourself of that motivation. If you're not ready to take on that as your motivation, then try to at least have some kind of altruistic state of mind of wanting to help other people and other beings as much as you can, and wanting to learn things from this class that will help you to be more beneficial for others. Okay, so the first of the 4 supreme strivings is to prevent the arisal of non-virtuous states of mind that haven't yet arisen. So think of some kind of negative, non-virtuous thought or state of mind that you sometimes experience, but maybe you're not experiencing it right now. It could be anger or jealousy or arrogance. And see if you can recognize the shortcomings of this state of mind, how it disturbs your mind, and it can disturb your interactions with others, become painful, hurtful, problematic to others, create negative karma, and so on. So try to recognize that this state of mind is not wholesome, but is unwholesome, and something you wish to avoid as much as you can. And based on that understanding, see if you can generate the aspiration to try to keep your mind free of that particular negative state. And then make that practical. Think of one thing you can do that would enable you to prevent your mind from getting caught up in that particular state of mind. Then the second supreme striving is abandoning non-virtues that have already arisen. So think of a situation, maybe something that happened recently, where a non-virtuous thought or attitude arose in your mind, and kind of reviewing that situation. Imagine yourself generating the aspiration to overcome this state of mind rather than letting yourself be overcome by it. So just imagine, maybe you didn't react that way at the time, but just, try to imagine that you did have this awareness, oh, this state of mind isn't a positive one. I don't want to let my mind go down that road, get caught up in that thought. And then think of a way that you could have dealt with that negative state of mind so that it left your mind didn't get caught up in it. And imagine that, if you find yourself in this kind of situation again in the future, that you will try harder to apply some remedy, some antidote to that negative state of mind, so you don't get totally caught up in it. Then the third supreme striving is to generate virtuous states of mind that haven't yet been generated. So think of a virtuous quality that you would like to have, but you do not yet have, or maybe you do have it, but just a small amount, and you would like to have more of that state of mind. And think about reasons why you want to have that state of mind, how it would be good for you and good for others, good for your spiritual practice and development. Then based on those good reasons, seeing how, it would be really good to have more of that state of mind, generate the wish, the aspiration to make effort towards that. And you might even think of some practical ways that you could work on increasing that state of mind. And the fourth and final of the supreme strivings is to maintain virtuous states of mind that you already have and not let them be lost or become degenerated. So again, think of some virtuous quality, virtuous state of mind, virtuous activity that you do already have and don't want to lose. Think of some good reasons why you want to maintain that state of mind or that behavior and not lose it. And then think of some ways in which you can be sure to maintain that state of mind and increase it rather than losing it or letting it decrease. And as you think of these practical methods, have the determination to use them, to apply them. And finally, to conclude the meditation, feel that you now have some new tools that you can use to help you become the kind of person you would like to be. So it's really important to have confidence that it is possible to change ourselves. I've heard that, there's some people who believe that we're born a certain way, we're born with certain qualities and abilities, and, we may be good at that and not good at that, but that's just the way we are, and we cannot change. We cannot change the way we are when we're born. I find that strange that people would believe that, but apparently some people do. And when people have that kind of view, they don't think it's possible to change themselves, so they don't even try. But research has been done that shows that when people are, encouraged to think that they can change, and then they accept that and feel, yeah, I can change, then they do put effort into changing themselves, and they do. Believing that you can change is really, really important to be able to do it. It definitely is possible, and I can say that with confidence. I have made a lot of changes in myself since I started meditating and learning Buddhism, so I know it's possible. But it's, you have to believe in it. And those four supreme strivings are, kind of like tools or ways that can help us change ourselves for the better. So decreasing the negative or non-virtuous qualities and ways of behaving, and then increasing the positive ones, the ones that are the cause of happiness for ourselves and others, but also for our spiritual practice. Very, very important. Okay, so the first slide in tonight's slides is just a review in case you forgot what we looked at last week. So again, we spent many, many weeks looking at the four establishments of mindfulness, or four close placements of mindfulness on the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. We looked at lots of different ways that those could be practiced and how beneficial it is to practice them. So those are just the first four of the 37 harmonies. And so now we have another 33 harmonies to learn about in just a couple of weeks. So I will be going through these kind of quickly. And after the four establishments or four close placements of mindfulness, the next group are these four supreme strivings that we just did a little meditation on. And they are all the mental factor of joyous effort. So those of you who have studied Lorik, mind and mental factors, you might remember in the list of virtuous mental factors, one of the virtuous mental factors is joyous effort, sometimes called perseverance or energy, but I really like the term joyous effort because, it sounds something you want to have, joyous. And the whole meaning of joyous effort is being happy, being joyful to do things that are virtuous. Yeah, so you don't get bored, tired, doing good deeds, but you love doing them and you want to keep doing more and more and more. So that's what joyous effort is about. So these four supreme strivings are all that mental factor of joyous effort. And basically, what they involve is engaging in abandoning what is non-virtuous, like non-virtuous states of mind, non-virtuous ways of behaving, so overcoming those, and then cultivating what is virtuous, positive qualities like love, compassion, equanimity, wisdom, and so on. So then last week we also looked at the next group of among the 37 harmonies, which are called Four Legs of Magical Emanation. And these are the mental factor of concentration. So concentration isn't a virtuous mental factor. It's kind of a neutral one. It's neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. But depending on why we are concentrating, what we are concentrating on, then it can become virtuous or non-virtuous. If somebody is planning, maybe, a general or, an officer in the army, and they're planning some, military campaign against the enemy to try to kill as many people and cause as much destruction as possible, and they're really focusing on that with good concentration, that would not be virtuous. But on the other hand, in the Buddhist path, we need to develop concentration. It's a very important quality to have, so that when we meditate, for example, especially when we're trying to generate wisdom, trying to gain wisdom, we need really, really strong concentration. Because if our mind is wandering here and there, falling asleep, and so on, then we won't be successful in gaining wisdom. So concentration is very important. So if we're practicing concentration, developing concentration with a virtuous motivation, like to become a Buddha, to attain liberation, and so on, then it becomes virtuous. So these are all concentration, and they are the bases for attaining spiritual powers, which are used to enhance one's practice and benefit others. So, so on the spiritual path, there is the option. It's optional. You don't have to do it. Like those who want to attain nirvana, liberation, they don't need to develop spiritual powers, but bodhisattvas do. So if you want to follow the bodhisattva path and reach full enlightenment, then this is something that needs to be done. Developing spiritual powers, things like being able to read other people's minds and emanate different forms of yourself, because these powers can be used to benefit others, but also they enhance your own practice, your own spiritual development. So yeah, for someone following the bodhisattva's path, then it is necessary to develop these powers, and they are all developed on the basis of concentration. So first you develop very strong concentration, and then you do other practices to attain these spiritual powers. And in the explanation of these four legs of magical emanation, we just started looking at that at the end of class. It says that they are supported on the 8 antidotes to the 5 faults. So we didn't have time to look at that last week, so we'll look at it tonight. It's on the next slide. So these 5 faults and 8 antidotes are explained in, they're part of the instructions for attaining calm abiding, or also, well, the Sanskrit term is shamatha, and the Tibetan term is shine. So that's sometimes translated as calm abiding or tranquility meditation or serenity meditation. There's different translations, but I think calm abiding is the most common one. And so calm abiding is, it's a practice to train your mind to concentrate. So you choose some object. It could be the breath. It could be an image of the Buddha. And then you meditate, focusing your mind on that object and bringing your mind back whenever it wanders away. And gradually, if you keep working at it, you can get to the point where you're able to stay concentrated on your object for a long period of time without being distracted, falling asleep, and so on. So you gain this really, really powerful and very blissful concentration. So while you're training your mind to attain calm abiding, you need to overcome certain faults. So they mentioned 5 faults. And then there are 8 antidotes that need to be applied to those faults to overcome them. So you probably heard this explanation before, but it doesn't hurt to go through it again, just to remind you. So the first of the faults is laziness. And this, laziness can mean different things, but in the context of developing calm abiding, laziness means when you just don't feel like meditating. You have this kind of reluctance to meditate. Have you ever felt that way? Like you get up in the morning and you kind of think, well, I should meditate. My teacher told me to. And it's something you should do as a Buddhist, but I just don't feel like it. And so you go and make a cup of coffee, and then you turn on your phone and look at your messages, you turn on your internet, look at your emails, and you just get all busy doing other things. You don't get around to meditating. So that's considered a kind of laziness. Reluctance to meditate. So I think it's easy to understand that if you have that problem, you're not going to be able to develop concentration or calm abiding, because you really have to put in a lot of time on the cushion or on the chair or wherever you sit. It does take time to train your mind to develop concentration. And if you're lazy and don't meditate, then you're not going to be able to attain it. Okay, so what to do about laziness? How to overcome it? There's 4 antidotes to laziness. The first is faith. And faith, we usually think of faith as like, faith in the Buddha or faith in your spiritual teacher. But here, faith means faith in the good qualities of concentration. Faith that if I attain concentration, if I attain calm abiding, then it will be really good for me. I'll have all these benefits. And so you do need to learn about what are the benefits of concentration. So some examples are, you feel great. Concentration is naturally blissful. When you're able to keep your mind focused for a good chunk of time, then you experience bliss in your body and also bliss in your mind, especially when you actually attain calm abiding. It's incredibly blissful. I'm not talking from experience, but those who have attained it, this is what they say. Very, very blissful. But that's not the real reason for developing calm abiding. It's not just to feel blissful. The real reason is so that you can control your mind and make sure it stays positive and virtuous and doesn't wander into things that are non-virtuous and negative. So you gain much more control over your mind and are able to do what you want with your mind, especially in the spiritual path. And also then you can attain powers, various powers, spiritual powers with which you can benefit others and also enhance your own good qualities and attain realizations and so on to progress along the path. So there's lots of good results that are gained by developing calm abiding. So if you learn about those, you think about those, then you will feel faith. You'll feel, yeah, that's a good thing to do. Then that leads to the second antidote, which is aspiration. Aspiration is the wish to attain it. I want to have that state of mind with those and have those beneficial qualities. This is, in a very worldly, mundane sense, this is a bit similar to, let's say there's a new iPhone and it has all these different things you can do with it, take fantastic pictures, make videos, and I don't know, whatever. I don't have an iPhone, so I don't know what you can do. But, when people hear about all the cool things, all the wonderful things you can do with this new iPhone, then that naturally leads to the aspiration to have one. I want one of those so that I can, use it for all those things. So it's a little bit similar. Yeah, if you learn about calm abiding and all the great things you can do when you have calm abiding, then you have this aspiration to attain it. And then aspiration leads to number 3, which is effort, or joyous effort. It's better to call it joyous effort. That's what I was just talking about. That is where you have this energy, and it's joyful energy. It's not like, oh, I have to do it, with great reluctance, but you're really enthusiastic and joyful about doing the practice and training your mind to attain calm abiding. Then, after putting in effort, you will attain calm abiding. And when you attain calm abiding, there's this quality called pliancy, which is number 4. And pliancy is another of the virtuous mental factors. And it's something that happens, something that is attained when you have calm abiding, when you have good concentration. Your body is, it's kind of very flexible, and you can do whatever you want with it. And your mind is also very flexible, serviceable, and you can do what you want with your mind. So it's like the opposite to having a heavy body and a heavy mind that, you just can't arouse, to do anything worthwhile. So they say you feel really light and, able to do anything. Of course, virtuous things, only virtuous things. And so that 4th antidote, number 4, pliancy, that's said to be the main antidote to laziness, because once you have that, laziness is finished. You don't have to make any more effort to have concentration. You just have to sit down, close your eyes, and bam, your mind just goes right into it. And it's very satisfying, very enjoyable. But it does take effort. We do have to practice and train our minds to get there. Okay, then the second fault is forgetfulness. And that doesn't just mean like forgetting people's names and phone numbers and so on. But in the case of this kind of meditation, it means forgetting your object. Forgetting, like, we start off, we sit down, we decide I'm going to meditate on the breath. And so you start paying attention to the breathing, coming in, going out, and so on. But then after a few seconds, or maybe after a few minutes, you forget that, you forget the breath, and you're thinking about something else, making plans or remembering something or worried about something, whatever. So your mind forgets the object of meditation and forgets that you're supposed to be paying attention to that object, and gets lost in other things. So the antidote to this is mindfulness. Is the opposite to forgetfulness. So we learned a little bit about that before at the beginning of the course. We looked at mindfulness and how it has 3 features, 3 aspects. One is that it has a familiar object. So it's focused on something familiar, like the breath. That's something we are familiar with. And then Then the second aspect is the mind doesn't forget the object. It's able to remember the object. The word for mindfulness and the word for memory or remembering, it's the same in Sanskrit and Pali and Tibetan. So that's what mindfulness means. It means remembering and not forgetting. And then the third aspect is that it has the function of not letting the mind get distracted to other things, yeah, other than your meditation object. So it keeps the mind on the object and you don't lose it, you don't forget it. So we already have mindfulness to a certain extent. It's a natural quality of the mind, but we need to train our mind to have it more often, and especially when we're practicing meditation. And then number 3, there's 2 actually, 2 in 1, laxity and excitement. These are said to be the main obstacles that need to be overcome to develop calm abiding. So laxity is a lack of clarity. The object isn't very, very clear and sharp in the way that we perceive it. The mind gets a little bit dull, and the way I think of it, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but if you're trying to look at something in the distance using binoculars or a telescope, and if the binoculars aren't focused properly, then you might see this object, but it's fuzzy, it's blurry, it's not clear. You can't see it clearly. So I think of that, when our mind is, perceiving the object in that way, that's like laxity. And then excitement, that's related to attachment. When when our mind gets distracted from the object of meditation because of attachment, because we think of something that we're attached to, then that's the meaning of excitement. And there's 2 levels of excitement. One is called coarse or gross excitement, and that's when your mind completely goes away from your object of meditation and gets involved with something else. You completely lose your object of meditation because you're distracted elsewhere. That's a coarse excitement. And then there's a subtle kind of excitement. After you've learned how to overcome coarse excitement and you're able to stay on the object without wandering away from it, but there can be this kind of underlying thoughts or memories or stuff going on kind of under the surface. So you're still focused on your object, but your mind is kind of thinking about other things, and that could lead to losing the object altogether, but it's just a more subtle kind of excitement. So so those are the 2 main problems. In the beginning, for beginners, excitement is the biggest problem because it's so hard to keep the mind focused on the object. The mind just keeps running away all the time. And then later, once we have better concentration, we're able to stay on the object longer. Then we have to watch out for laxity. That's when the mind just kind of sinks a little bit, gets kind of dull and not very alert and clear. And so the antidote to both of these is introspective awareness, or also called vigilance. We also learned about that earlier. It's said to be a kind of, I think of it as a sidekick of mindfulness. So they say when mindfulness is there, if you have good mindfulness, you will also have introspective awareness. And it's the one that's compared to a spy. It's kind of watching the mind, what's going on, what is the mind doing, and is able to notice if the mind is caught up in one of these problems, either excitement or laxity. So it's that's its role. is to kind of ensure that your meditation is going well and is good quality, and looking out for problems that would obstruct your practice. Then fourth is called non-application, and what that means is if one of these faults arises, while you're sitting there meditating, and if you have laxity or excitement happening in your mind and you don't do anything about it, you just let it happen, you don't apply any antidote to those faults, that becomes another fault. Another fault, non-application. I think, maybe a kind of practical example of this might be, let's say you're a parent and your child is supposed to be doing their homework, but instead of doing their homework, they're playing computer games or, whatever, doing something else other than their homework. And you know it, you notice your child doing that, but you don't say anything, you don't do anything, you don't, try to get them to stop what they're doing and do their homework. Yeah. So in a similar way, if our mind, we're supposed to be meditating, focusing, concentrating, but our mind is wandering off doing other things, and we just let it happen. We don't take care of that problem. That's the meaning of non-application. So that's a fault. And the antidote to that is application. So application means applying the antidotes, applying the appropriate antidotes to whatever fault is happening. So for excitement, which is the main problem we have in the beginning, we need to keep bringing the mind back to the object. When it wanders away, bring it back. And it said that, sometimes excitement happens because we're trying too hard. We're kind of being too tight with ourselves, concentrating too hard, and that can cause the mind to get excited. So they say it's good to just kind of relax a little bit, loosen up a little bit. That might help. But if that doesn't help, other things you could do would be to remind yourself of things that that have a sobering effect on the mind. For example, remembering impermanence and death, remembering karma, remembering the suffering of samsara. So those topics have, a sobering effect on the mind, so that it's less likely to get all excited and want to run off to objects of attachment. And then for laxity happens because the mind has become too withdrawn and maybe too absorbed into itself. And so it said one antidote to that is to brighten the mind. One way you can do that is by thinking of light, imagining light, visualizing light. Or another antidote is contemplating uplifting topics. The mind needs to be uplifted. So thinking about something that's inspiring, like preciousness of the human life, thinking about, the Buddha or your teacher and their excellent qualities. So something that uplifts, brings energy into the mind. So those are just some of the antidotes. But, when you're studying calm abiding, there's a lot of material about this, how to notice the faults and how to apply antidotes to them when they're happening. Then number 5, the fifth fault is over-application. What that means, this is a problem that would happen in later stages once you're doing really well in your concentration. So this is when you don't have, there's no faults going on, the mind isn't having the problem of laxity or excitement. But you are still applying the antidotes. You're applying the antidotes when there's actually nothing to apply it to, no fault happening. And using that same analogy I mentioned before of the parent and their child who's supposed to do their homework. So let's say the child has now stopped playing computer games and they're doing their homework. They're sitting there doing their homework as they should do. But you continue talking to them. You continue giving them a lecture, about how they should be doing their homework and not doing other things. So that would, the kid wouldn't appreciate that very much. Your mind could get kind of agitated, and anyway, then they wouldn't be able to do their homework well. So we need to know when it's the appropriate time to apply antidotes and when to leave our mind alone and just let it meditate and concentrate. And the antidote for that is equanimity. So there's different meanings of equanimity. And here, the meaning of equanimity is just letting the mind be and not applying any antidotes when there's no need to. So that's also a virtuous mental factor. So that's just a quick rundown of these 5 faults and the 8 antidotes. So the 4 legs of magical emanation are based on the 8 antidotes. So as you're cultivating concentration, you are cultivating those antidotes, developing them really well. And by that, you're overcoming those 5 faults. So based on a good, strong development, cultivation of the 8 antidotes, then based on that, you develop these 4 legs of magical emanation. Okay, so let's move on. So once again, this is the list of the 37 harmonies, it's kind of like a map where we are. So far, we have done the first 3 groups, 4 close placements of mindfulness, the 4 correct abandonings. Oh, that's another term. Yeah. Sorry, I was calling them 4 supreme strivings. There's different ways of translating them. So 4 correct abandonings is just another way of saying the 4 supreme strivings. And then the 3rd group is the 4 legs of magical emanation. That's the one we just looked at. And so tonight we'll look at the 5 powers and the 5 strengths. And if we have time, we'll start looking at the 6th group, which is the 7 branches of enlightenment. So here it says the 5 powers, this is number 4, the 4th group. 5 powers are paths that prepare for clear realizations. So these are mental states in the minds of those who have already attained a path, and they prepare the mind for attaining clear realizations. Probably the main clear realization would be the direct realization of emptiness, which will be coming later. Because the 5 powers are developed, or they're brought to full attainment on the heat and peak levels of the path of preparation. So the path of preparation is the 2nd of the 5 paths, and that has 4 levels. First 2 levels are called heat and peak. And then the 5 strengths, number 5, 5th group, these are called paths that connect to clear realizations, and they are brought to fulfillment on the forbearance and supreme mundane quality levels of the path of preparation. Those are the last 2 of the levels of the path of preparation. So let's look at that first group, the 5 powers. Next slide. And I put the Sanskrit and Tibetan terms because different translators, different books might translate these in English. They might use different terms. So if you're interested in the original terms in Sanskrit and Tibetan, those are there. In Sanskrit, Indriya, and Tibetan, the way that's pronounced is Wangpo, not Dbongpo. Tibetan's a funny language. They have some letters that are silent or not pronounced, so the D there doesn't get pronounced, but the D makes the B become Wa. Okay, so it's Wangpo. You know that term. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Oh, Geshe-la, Geshe Ngawang Drakpa. So his first name, Nga Wang. So the Wang in his first name is the same one here. Wang means power. Yeah. Same like when we talk about initiations, taking an initiation. The Tibetan term for that is Wang. Wang, and that's how it's spelled. Yeah, so Wang can be used in different contexts, and yeah, it usually does have the sense of power. For example, we talk about the 5 sense powers. You probably heard that term. We have eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. Okay, we have these 5 sense powers, and the 5 sense powers, they're actually physical, some kind of subtle physical material, within those senses that enable our mind, our consciousness to perceive objects. So the eye sense power is some kind of very subtle material or physical material in the eye that enables us to see things, to see colors and shapes. And in our ears, we have this ear sense power that enables our mind to hear sounds. So they empower the mind to perceive things. So that's one use of the term power, Wangpo. But here, it's got a different meaning. So there's the first bullet point is the definition, and so it says a power which is within these 37 harmonies, is an exalted knower that is independently able to generate its result, an Arya path. So saying that here a power is an exalted knower means it's not something physical, it's not matter, but it's mind, it's consciousness, and it's an exalted knower, meaning it's at the very least on the path of accumulation, the first of the 5 paths. So only someone who has attained one of the paths would have this power. And then it says it's independently able to generate its result, an Arya path. I wondered about this term, independently. What does that mean? But I didn't find any explanation of that. So maybe, my guess, maybe it means that, these powers are very powerful, and without needing other things, just on their own, they are able to bring about their results. And the result is an Arya path. So Arya is the term for someone who has realized emptiness, direct realization of emptiness. So an Arya is quite a highly accomplished person. And an Arya path means a mind, a consciousness, a realization in the mind of an Arya. And the main Arya path is the direct realization of emptiness. That is what makes you an Arya. It's only when you've had that realization that you are an Arya. And so, but Aryas can have other paths as well, other realizations in their mind. So basically, then a power is something that brings about an Arya path. Then the second bullet point says they are called powers because they empower us to attain enlightenment. So they are essential to be able to attain all the qualities and realizations of the path to enlightenment. And then next it says they prepare for clear realizations and are fully attained on the heat and peak levels of the path of preparation. So we cultivate these 5 powers before we can start cultivating them now. You train in them, you cultivate them, but it's only on the path of preparation, the first 2 levels of the path of preparation, that they are fully attained, fully developed. So the next slide shows the list of the 5 powers. So we'll start looking at these, and then in a couple of minutes, stop for our break. So the 5 powers are the power of faith, power of joyous effort, power of mindfulness, the power of meditative stabilization, and the power of wisdom. So, we've encountered many of these terms before, like faith, joyous effort, and so on. And but here, they are the power of faith. Like we can have faith and we can have joyous effort, but our faith and joyous effort may not be the power of faith, the power of joyous effort. So that's like an enhanced, stronger version of those qualities, those mental factors. So faith, faith is, one of the virtuous mental factors, and it's something very, very important in spiritual practice. For example, we need to have faith in the Buddha, all 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We also need to have faith that there is such a thing as enlightenment, and that we have the ability to attain it. We have Buddha nature and so on. And here, there's different kinds of faith. And one type of faith is called faith of conviction. And that's said to be the best kind of faith. That's the kind of faith that comes about not just through feeling. Sometimes we may have faith, just a good feeling. I have a good feeling for the Dalai Lama, for example. I have faith in the Dalai Lama because, he's such a good person and I feel so good when I see him and so on. So that's kind of more of an emotional faith, and that's can be kind of shaky, not very firm. But one type of faith is faith of conviction, and that comes about through analyzing, like investigating the Buddha's teachings, thinking about them, trying to understand them, asking questions. So, over time, you get to the point where you have a really firm conviction that the Buddha's teachings are valid and true and beneficial, and you want to practice them, you want to follow them. Now, that kind of faith is based on having gone through a process of investigation and reaching certainty. And that kind of faith is the best one because it can't be shaken. Even if somebody comes along and tells you you're wrong and you're stupid and you should give up your beliefs, you should do this instead, you're not going to be shaken because from deep down inside that what you hold to be true is true. So here, when it says the power of faith, it's that kind of faith. It's strong conviction. And in particular, it's a conviction regarding the 4 noble truths. So you would come to that by having, really learned about the 4 noble truths, studied, thought about, meditated on, and reached a conviction. Yeah, you're certain that these 4 noble truths are truths. They are true. and you want to live your life around them, which basically means abandoning the first two truths, true suffering and true origins of suffering, and attaining the last two, true cessations and true paths. Okay, so maybe we should stop here. We're not going to get through all of this within a few minutes. So let's stop here and have a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and continue. Okay, so number 2 is the power of joyous effort. So we encountered that term a little earlier, and I said that's when you have joy, happiness, delight in doing things that are virtuous. So we probably all experience that sometimes if we're really like into something, like helping people, doing volunteer work, cooking for people, and so on, doing things that benefit others. And we're just really happy, to do those things. So that's the meaning of joyous effort. But the power of joyous effort here, this would be in the mind of someone who has attained at least the first of the 5 paths. So it's quite a high degree of joyous effort. And it's particularly, again, focused on the Four Noble Truths. So delighting in discarding the first 2 truths, true sufferings and true origins, like you really want to overcome those, to become free from those, and you're happy to do whatever it takes to be able to do that. And then adopting true cessations and true paths. So that's how to overcome the first 2 truths, is by attaining true cessations and true paths. And so, I mean, this follows from the first power, the power of faith. You're convinced about the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, and that gives you joyous effort to do whatever it takes to eliminate the first 2 truths, sufferings and origins, and attain the second truth, cessations and paths. And then the third one is the power of mindfulness. So again, mindfulness is a term we've encountered many times before, but here it's the power of mindfulness. So it's a very strong level of mindfulness. And again, it's related to the Four Noble Truths. It doesn't forget the objects of observation and aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So with this power, the person is able to keep their mind focused on whatever they need to think about and contemplate and practice with regard to the Four Noble Truths, such as, just awareness of the suffering of samsara and totally dedicated to becoming free from that, as well as the causes of suffering, and then focused on the methods, the antidotes, which are the last 2 truths. And then number 4, the power of meditative stabilization. So the term meditative stabilization is also translated as concentration, and it's a mental factor, the mental factor that is able to remain focused on whatever object you choose to focus it on. Okay, so the power of meditative stabilization is a single-pointed mind focused on the Four Noble Truths without distraction. So this is, so this enables the person, the practitioner, to be able to keep their mind focused on those Four Noble Truths and be able to be successful in eliminating the first two and attaining the last two. And then the fifth is the power of wisdom. So this is explained as it discriminates the mode of abidance of the Four Noble Truths. So that means how the Four Noble Truths actually exist. What is their real nature? According to the Prasangika Madhyamaka school, the true nature of the Four Noble Truths is emptiness, emptiness of inherent existence. Nothing exists inherently, independently. And so that's the main object that we focus on to develop wisdom. But wisdom, there's also other kinds of wisdom that understand other things like impermanence and other levels of selflessness. Okay, so those are the 5 powers, and in the book Following Buddha's Footsteps, it says that these 5 powers have a strong influence to oppose their opposites. So there's an opposite state of mind to each of these 5 powers. So for the first, faith is the opposite to that is non-faith. That's again one of the secondary, it's a mental factor. It's one of the secondary afflictions, secondary delusions. And it's actually a type of ignorance that doesn't believe in, doesn't have admiration for, and doesn't aspire for virtuous things. So for example, with regard to the Buddha, not believing in the Buddha, not admiring the Buddha, not aspiring to become like the Buddha. So having that state of mind, that's called lack of faith or non-faith. So the power of faith is able to oppose that opposite state of mind of the lack of faith or non-faith. And then number 2, power of joyous effort. The opposite to that is laziness, which is also an affliction, a secondary affliction. So developing this power of joyous effort, we're able to overcome laziness. And then number 3, the opposite of mindfulness is forgetfulness. Mainly forgetting our object of meditation, but it can also mean forgetting virtuous things, like our teacher's advice, the precepts that we've taken, positive qualities like love, compassion, bodhicitta. So just forgetting those, the mind moving away from those, not retaining awareness of those. So forgetfulness is opposed by mindfulness. And then for the number 4, meditative stabilization or concentration, the opposite of that is distraction, which is another affliction. It's one of the secondary afflictions among the mental factors. So that's when our mind is distracted, not concentrated. And then wisdom, the 5th one, the power of wisdom, the opposite to that is ignorance. So wisdom opposes ignorance. There's actually many kinds of ignorance. So yeah, I suppose in that same way, there's many kinds of wisdom to oppose the many kinds of ignorance. The worst kind of ignorance is the one we hear about a lot, the self-grasping ignorance, believing in our own self and everything else as being inherently, independently existing. That's the deepest and worst form of ignorance. And so the opposite to that will be the wisdom that realizes emptiness of that mode of existence, inherent existence. So the 5 powers then are direct antidotes to 5 different types of afflictions. And it said that for a person who's on the path of preparation, the first two levels of the path of preparation, heat and peak. So when these five powers are manifest in their mind during meditation, so when they're in meditation, they have these five powers in a manifest way, meaning they're kind of on the surface, they're active. And during such times, then the opposite states of mind don't manifest. They're like suppressed. So non-faith, laziness, forgetfulness, distraction, and ignorance can't manifest, can't rise up to the surface. However, when the person stops meditating and they get up and walk around and do other things, it's possible for the five opposite states of mind to arise. So they might experience, laziness and forgetfulness and so on and so forth. Okay, so then that's the five powers. Then the next group among the 37 harmonies is the five strengths. And the five strengths are exactly the same as the five powers. I mean, they have the same names, terms like faith and I forget, faith, and then joyous effort, mindfulness, meditative stabilization, and wisdom. So it's the same five items, but now they're called strengths rather than powers. And I put the terms there in case you're interested. There are different terms in Tibetan and Sanskrit. So in Sanskrit, it's bala. In Tibetan, it's top. The S is silent, top. So again, some translators might translate these terms in another way. They might call these the five powers and the other five something else. So that's why it's tricky when you're just relying on translations, and you don't have the original terms, Sanskrit and Tibetan. Okay, so these five, these are the same five mental factors as in the previous group: faith, joyous effort, mindfulness, concentration, or meditative stabilization, and wisdom. But they are stronger. They're, more developed, more enhanced, more powerful. And they are so powerful they can't be shaken by their opposites, the opposites of like laziness and so on. And that'll be clarified a little later. So the second bullet point is they are paths. Again, path, the word path means state of mind, a realization of someone who has attained at least the path of accumulation. So they are paths that connect to clear realizations, meaning that they enable the person, the practitioner, to connect with, to gain, to experience clear realizations, and are fully attained on the last two levels of the path of preparation. So again, the path of preparation, that's the second of the five paths, has 4 levels. So these are attained on the last two levels, which are called forbearance and supreme mundane quality. And then it says, on those 2 levels, manifest non-faith and so forth do not arise even during post-meditation. So what that means is, when I explained the 5 powers, I said that someone who has attained the 5 powers, when they're meditating, when they're in a meditative state, and the 5 powers are manifest, they are strong, they are on the surface, they are present in their mind. So during those times, the opposite states of mind, like laziness, non-faith, laziness, and so on, the opposites can't arise, cannot manifest. But then when they come out of meditation at other times when they're not meditating, then those opposite states of mind can arise. So they can experience a lack of faith, laziness, forgetfulness, distractedness, and ignorance. Those opposite states of mind that are all afflictions, those can arise. But here, with these 5 strengths, which again are in the mind of someone who's on the upper levels, the last 2 levels of the path of preparation. So when the practitioner, both in meditation and out of meditation, those 5 opposite states of mind will not arise. They will not experience a lack of faith or laziness or forgetfulness, distraction, and ignorance. So even out of meditation, they don't arise. Now, that doesn't mean that those 5 opposite states of mind have been totally eliminated from the mind. That doesn't happen until later in the path, but they're just strongly under control. The person is able to keep their mind free from those afflicted states of mind arising. So, yeah, be nice, good to think about what that would be like, whether you're meditating or you're out of meditation, no matter where you are, what you're doing, you would never have a lack of faith, you would never have laziness, you would never have forgetfulness. Your mind would always be able to stay focused on, what you want to stay focused on, something virtuous. You wouldn't have distraction, you wouldn't have ignorance. Yeah, they just wouldn't be popping up in your mind, on the surface of the mind. Okay. So then the next slide, there's a verse from Nagarjuna where he's talking about these 5. He says, with faith, effort, and mindfulness, concentration and wisdom, 5 in all, you must strive hard to reach the highest state. As powers, these faculties take you to the peak. Okay, any questions so far on anything I've talked about?
It's very quiet. Feel free to message if you want to ask your question that way.
I know sometimes it's difficult to ask questions about these topics, which seem so high, so advanced, so kind of beyond our present level of ability. Okay, Min?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah?
Yeah, I have a question. So, basically, these um, these powers or characteristics, basically, a lot. They span like multiple lifetimes. And one of the questions that sometimes people always ask, and I do hear about from friends from time to time, is that how do you know what to focus on the practice, and do you want to basically focus on a little bit of everything, or do you want to basically take one practice, for example, like mindfulness or faith or joyous efforts, and then really put the time into it?
That's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. The Buddhist path, when you learn about it, go into all these details, it can seem like overwhelming. There's so much to do, so much to learn, so many different practices. And, most people don't have all day to practice. I mean, there are people, in Buddhist countries who completely dedicate all their time and energy to learning and practicing, and they probably have teachers living nearby. Like if they're living in a monastery, they have a teacher there in the monastery, or several teachers that is guiding them in their practice, and is able to determine, okay, you need, when they're beginners, they have to do this, and then when they get more experience, then they guide them to the next stage, and so on and so forth. So people who are in that kind of situation, they have lots of time, they have skilled teachers advising them and telling them what to do as they're going along, and that's ideal. But most people aren't in such a situation. So like what we're learning here in this course is really the bodhisattva's path, all the things that a bodhisattva needs to do to go all the way to Buddhahood, to enlightenment. And I know myself, I'm still very much a beginner, even though I've been, learning Buddhism and practicing Buddhism for 50 years now. But I still feel like, in terms of my practice, I'm still at a beginning level. I'm nowhere near like the 5 paths, the path of accumulation and so on. So I'm still learning, and practicing as much as I can, like focusing on ethics, trying to live ethically, watch my behavior, what I'm doing with my body, speech, and mind, and looking out for non-virtuous negative actions, trying to stop those, purify them, and so on. And I mean, these different qualities we're talking about, like faith, mindfulness, and so on, we do need to cultivate those qualities. Yeah. Even if you're just like somebody who's just practicing meditation on the breath, mindfulness meditation on the breath for maybe 30 minutes a day. Okay. But those qualities are important parts of the practice. You need to have faith, a certain amount of faith that what you're doing is worthwhile and it's going to get you somewhere. Okay, if you didn't have any faith at all, then you wouldn't even be interested in doing that practice. And then, of course, you need mindfulness. Oh, joyous effort. You need joyous effort. Otherwise, you're lazy and you don't do anything. You just sleep until 10 o'clock in the morning and don't get up and meditate. So you need a certain amount of joyous effort just to keep doing the practice. And of course, you need mindfulness during your meditation practice. You need to cultivate that quality of mindfulness that remembers your object of meditation, doesn't forget, but keeps going back to it. And then gradually you develop concentration. If you keep doing your practice, your ability to concentrate will increase. And wisdom is something we need to develop as well. We do that by learning, listening to teachings and studying, learning the teachings on wisdom, and asking questions if we don't understand something, and then at least sometimes meditating to develop wisdom, like meditating on impermanence, meditating on emptiness. Yeah, so I think even someone who's not practicing full time, like, people in Asian countries or living in monasteries. But, you know, if you are serious about learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma, you will, and ideally you have a teacher, you have at least one teacher that you're following, listening to their teachings, following their guidance and so on, that is helping you in your practice. So you start to develop some of these qualities. And it is important also to understand where you're at and what your abilities are, and not try to take on too much or not try to be at a higher level than you really are. So a certain amount of humility is very important. So I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but you know, in our tradition, in the Tibetan tradition, we have what we call the Lamrim. This is in our, especially Gelugpa tradition. This is the main thing we study and meditate on, and it kind of lays out the path to enlightenment in a step-by-step way, a bit like Google Maps or GSP that's telling you, okay, you are here now, and where you want to get to is there, so you have to go this way and da-da-da-da-da. So it's a bit like that. And so that's very helpful. It's very helpful to learn the Lamrim, and that helps you to figure out where you're at now and what you need to do, what you need to think about, meditate on, practice to go step by step towards enlightenment.
We also have some questions from the chat.
Okay.
Is attaining calm abiding a requirement for achieving the 5 powers?
Oh, let's see. Attaining calm abiding. Well, I've heard I think in our tradition, following Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen's explanation, for someone following the Mahayana path, the first path, the path of accumulation, is attained when you have uncontrived bodhicitta, when you have bodhicitta that arises naturally and spontaneously without making any effort. And Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen says, before attaining that kind of uncontrived bodhicitta, you have to have calm abiding. But I heard from someone who's from another Gelugpa monastery that they have a different view, that it isn't necessary to attain calm abiding before having uncontrived bodhicitta. So there's different opinions about that, and I'm in no position to say which one is right. I mean, eventually, of course, you do have to develop calm abiding. It is necessary, but at what point on the path is it absolutely necessary? That seems to be uncertain. Definitely.
And there was a second part to that, I'm sorry. The follow-up was, if it's even for moving on to the path of preparation, is calm abiding necessary or just beneficial? So it was a two-part question.
Yeah, so okay, so the beginning of the path of preparation, the attainment of the path of preparation, is the point where you have a union of calm abiding and special insight with respect to emptiness, with emptiness as the object. So definitely, to attain the path of preparation, it's necessary to have attained calm abiding, and beyond that, the union of calm abiding and special insight. So that means if you haven't attained calm abiding before the path of accumulation, you definitely have to attain it on the path of accumulation before you can move to the next path, the path of preparation. So yeah, so that answers that question, that somebody who has fully developed these 5 powers and 5 strengths is someone who has already attained calm abiding. Is that it?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Wangmo, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for these teachings. Are these powers and the paths that you're speaking of, are these also a part of Vajrayana practice, or is this like Sutrayana, or is it all kind of part of both?
Well, Vajrayana, in order to practice Vajrayana or Tantra, it is necessary to first train in, the basic teachings, especially the Lam Rim, the 3 principal aspects of the path, 6 perfections, developing bodhicitta, having quite a good understanding of emptiness. So it's usually explained based on the Lam Rim, familiarity with and experience in the Lam Rim topics before you can really engage in Vajrayana practice. But how much, like what we are looking at here in this course, is the Ornament for Clear Realizations, which is exclusively Sutrayana. It doesn't talk at all about Vajrayana. It is not clear to me how much of this material would be necessary to practice by someone who wants to follow the Vajrayana path. I mean, in the Vajrayana path, they definitely have to proceed through the 5 paths, path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, and so on. But they do it in a different way, using different practices to attain the 5 paths. But I would think, like in the Tibetan tradition, at least in the Gelugpa tradition, our teachers, who are usually geshis, so they go through many years of study in the monasteries. They study, very thoroughly this text, Ornament for Clear Realizations, as well as, other texts. And only after they've completed their studies do they then go to Tantric college and learn about Vajrayana practice. I mean, probably many of them are doing some Vajrayana practice before they go to Tantric college, but just by that process, you can see that ideally, before really going deeply into Vajrayana practice, you have a thorough understanding of these other subjects, and you're able to incorporate them into your practice of Vajrayana. But my knowledge of that is still limited. It's better to ask someone like Yangtze Rinpoche or Geshe Ngawang Dakpa, because they've gone through that whole process of study. Okay, so let's see, we've got a bit of time left. Let's start looking at the next topic, which are these 7 branches of enlightenment. So this is the next group of the 37 harmonies. It's group number 6, and it has 7 items, which are called 7 branches of enlightenment, but another translation are 7 awakening factors. And I think I'll use that second term, awakening factors. It's shorter, it's easier to say. In our tradition, the Mahayana tradition, these are all Arya paths, meaning that they are in the minds of Arya beings, those who've directly realized emptiness. So they would be attained from the path of seeing onwards. But of course, we cultivate them earlier than that. We start working on them. And okay, so the first bullet point says they are so called because they are causes for enlightenment, for awakening. And here, enlightenment can mean either Buddhahood, full enlightenment Buddhahood, which is the goal for those following the Mahayana path, but it can also refer to nirvana, liberation from samsara, which is the goal of those following the Theravada path in the Pali tradition. So both of those goals are called enlightenment. And these 7 factors, these 7 awakening factors, do need to be cultivated by both bodhisattvas aiming for enlightenment and hearers and solitary realizers aiming for nirvana. Okay, so these 7 are also antidotes to various afflictions and hindrances, things that cause problems and suffering and prevent us from attaining enlightenment. So by cultivating these 7, we are able to overcome 7 types of obstacles. And it seems that in the Pali tradition, in the Pali canon, the Theravada tradition, there's a lot of material about these 7. They're talked about a lot because the Buddha talked about them a lot in the Pali sutras. And in fact, in one sutra, the Buddha says, I do not see even one thing that, when developed and cultivated, leads to the abandoning of the things that fetter so effectively as these 7. So Buddha is saying, these 7 are really effective, really beneficial to overcome things that fetter us, that keep us tied up, unfree in samsara and so on. So the 7 are the awakening factor, which I'll sometimes abbreviate as AF, save space on the screen. The awakening factor of mindfulness, investigation, also called discrimination of phenomena, effort or energy, joy, pliancy, concentration, and equanimity. So again, at least some of these terms we have encountered before. For example, mindfulness. Okay, so that was there in the first 4 of the 37 harmonies, the close placements of mindfulness, and then it was also there in the 7 powers and the 7 strengths and so on. But understand that mindfulness is a mental factor that everybody has, at least sometimes, but it's an important mental factor in our spiritual practice, in our spiritual development. And so we need to develop it and use it in different ways, such as with the close placements of mindfulness on the body, feelings, and so on. And then with the 5 powers and the 5 strengths, we use mindfulness to focus on the 4 noble truths and work with those, practice those in the sense of overcoming the first 2 truths and attaining the second 2 truths. And again, here, it's one of these awakening factors. So it has kind of a different role to play in this, which we will look at. So it's basically that same mental factor, but used in different stages of one's practice and focused on different objects and developed further and further as you go along the path. Your mindfulness becomes more and more powerful, more and more enhanced. Okay, so the next slide contains some general information about the 7 awakening factors from Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen. Again, he's the person who wrote the commentaries that are studied in Saraje Monastery. So what he says about these, and this is based on Asanga's texts. An awakening factor is an exalted knower in an Arya's continuum that acts as a cause of the enlightenment that is its result. That's a general meaning of an awakening factor. So it's an exalted knower, mind, in an Arya's continuum. That means only Aryas actually have these awakening factors. And it's a cause for enlightenment. Then it says, the purpose of cultivating them is to abandon all the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing without exception. So the path of seeing is the third of the 5 paths, and that's a really important kind of milestone on the way to enlightenment, because that's when you gain the direct realization of emptiness. And the direct realization of emptiness is the direct antidote to the obscurations, the things that need to be abandoned. Up until the path of seeing, you can't abandon, you can't eliminate any of the afflictions. You just don't have the means to do that. All you can do is suppress them, control them, keep them managed, under control, but you can't completely eliminate them. But once you have attained the path of seeing, that means you've got this direct realization of emptiness. And that mind, that direct realization of emptiness, is able to wipe out or eliminate some of the afflictions. You can't do it all at once, but you are able to eliminate some. And the first ones that are eliminated are what are called acquired afflictions. So, for example, anger, attachment, jealousy, and so on. Those are some of the afflictions that we're trying to eliminate, and they have different levels to them. Some of those levels are called innate. Those are the ones that are really, really deep in our mind. They've been in our mind from beginningless time. We're born with them. We come into this life already with anger and attachment and ignorance and so on, those afflictions. So those are the hardest ones to get rid of. But then there's acquired afflictions, and acquired afflictions are the ones that we learn in this life. They don't always give examples of these, yeah, or they do, but they're kind of not always applicable to us. In the traditional text, they say that, like, if you're studying a non-Buddhist philosophy, like the Samkhyas or Charvakas, or one of these ancient Indian philosophies that were other than Buddhism, and when you're studying those philosophies, you might be taught certain things like the existence of a self, a soul, an Atman, and you hear that from your teachers, you buy into it, you believe it, you hold on to that view that there is a self, there is a soul. So that would be an example of an acquired affliction. You weren't born with that. It wasn't with you when you were born, but you learned it later in life. But most of us probably don't study those philosophies. But we do acquire other kinds of afflictions. For example, because of where we are born, the country that we're born in, and also maybe we're brought up in a certain religion, or we're part of a certain ethnic group, or whatever, the circumstances of our birth, the conditions of our birth, and our education, and so on. So through that, we may acquire certain afflictions. So one example might be attachment to being American. Okay, I mean, we're not born with that. We don't come into this world thinking, I'm an American and I'm proud to be an American. That's something we develop, that we acquire, growing up in America, especially if we have a very patriotic family, and go to a school where that's kind of drummed into us. So then we may develop this strong sense of identity and pride about our country and about being an American. Now that's considered an affliction because it's, it's kind of very egocentric, and pride, anyway, pride is an affliction. It can cause us to be arrogant towards other people who are not part of our group, and it can lead to anger and fights and conflicts and all kinds of nasty things. So it's not, it's fine to appreciate America and think, recognize the good things about America, but to actually have pride and, big sense of ego related to that. So that would be an acquired affliction. So that's just an example. So we have, in addition to the innate inborn afflictions and delusions, we also have ones that we acquire through our family, our conditioning, our society, our education, and so on. So it's those acquired afflictions are the ones that get eliminated by the path of seeing. So it's said that it's the first moment you attain the path of seeing, the first moment you have a direct realization of emptiness, all the acquired afflictions are wiped out. Just like, whiteboard being erased. All of those are gone. But you still have the innate ones, the innate afflictions, the innate anger, and so on, the ones that we're born with, those are still there. Those are overcome gradually after the path of seeing. Okay, so we need to cultivate these awakening factors to abandon the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing without exception. And those objects of abandonment are these acquired afflictions in our mind. And then the objects of observation of all 7 of these are the 4 truths. So again, the 4 noble truths, or the 4 truths of Aryas. So that's what they focus on: true origin, true suffering, true origins, true cessations, and true paths. Okay, so we don't have time to do more tonight, so next week we'll pick up from there and we'll start going through the 7. The next slides are giving more information about each of the 7 awakening factors. Okay, there's a few minutes left if anyone would like to ask a question.
Min has his hand raised.
Okay, Min.
I think Dorian's was trying to ask a question, and so that's why I also have a question too, but I can ask later.
Okay, so you'd like Dorian to go first. Dorian?
Thank you. I was having trouble getting my hand up. I'm very curious about, because I was brought up as a born again Christian, so that did have that institutionalized way of thinking that you have a soul and you're permanent in that way. And so I'm really curious into how, like, when you come into you have a continuum that you come in with, but then that can change to become a Buddha, say. Is that, I don't understand it quite, how that, what happens that you, like, how, where's the, like how, like the mental continuum that we come in with that, has come through different lives. And I understand because, like, the different lives that, I've had some experiences where, anyway, it's not important, but just knowing that it feels very different to a life that I'm having now, it's like that wasn't me, but you can see that there's a continuation. But how is that continuation? What is that? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's important to learn about the mind in Buddhism, the way Buddhism explains the mind. And that helps, I think, with this question. So according to Buddhism, each of us has a mind, which is also called a mental continuum, kind of interchangeable terms. And it's a non-physical thing. It's not something material or physical, but it's just, I sometimes use the word energy, but that's kind of vague. But it's that quality of knowing, awareness, experiencing things. So it's with us all the time, like all day long. You know, we have awareness of things. We see things, we hear things, we think things, we remember things, we feel things emotionally. So all of those different experiences are part of our mind. They're all like individual facets of this mind that continues. And so it's like a stream of these different experiences coming and going, coming and going. And it just never stops. It's going 24 hours a day, even when we're asleep or unconscious. And so you can trace that. That can be traced back in time to childhood, to infancy, to, you know, the first moment of our life, or even beyond that, conception. According to Buddhism, you know, mind is already there at the moment of conception. Before conception, that mind was somewhere else, in another body, having another life, another, you know, identity, other experiences, and so on. And then that person died, that, you know, and then death actually means the separation of the body and the mind. So the mind of that previous person left that body and then found its way into our mother's womb. And that was the beginning of this life. Now we're alive. Our mind is having all these different experiences all day long, you know, over and over and over. And eventually, you know, at some point, we'll come to the end of our life. And then, you know, when this body can't sustain life anymore, then our mind, our consciousness will separate from this body and go to find the next one. And it just keeps going like that, life after life after life. So the mind itself, again, is just this quality of experience, of awareness. And then when it finds itself in a new body, then it starts having experiences related to that body. Okay, so this life we're in a human body. We may be male or female or something else, and we learn things from our parents, we learn things from our society, we learn things on our own, reading, experiencing things. And so we develop all these kind of thoughts and experiences based on what we've learned in this life. And we also develop a sense of identity, who I am. My name is this, and I'm this, and I'm this, and but all those things we learn in one lifetime mostly get left behind, get forgotten, and as the mind goes from one life to the next. There's some exceptions, like some little, especially little children, often have very clear memories of their previous life and even identify themselves as that person, you know, and say, my name isn't Anne, my name is Barbara, you know, and whatever. And they'll talk about, you know, their previous life. So some memories may carry over, but then they're usually forgotten. As the child gets older, they start having new experiences, and then they develop this new identity and then forget those other memories. So what it is that has these experiences, that thinks these things and feels these things, and that is mind. I mean, that's just a very brief explanation of mind. There's a lot more to it than that, but yeah, it's a big subject. I hope that makes some sense. And I was thinking, it's already past time, so maybe, Min, you can save your question for next week, or you could send it, you could email it to Afi, and she can send it to me, and then I can answer it next week. Yeah? Okay, so let's finish there and dedicate the merit, the positive energy we have accumulated tonight.
May the world be happy, the years good, and grains increase, the Dharma flourish, every happiness and bliss arise, and every wish in the mind be fulfilled. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Prataka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Munis' precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you especially, Venerable Sangye Khadro.
Thank you, Effie, for hosting. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.